Welcome to the Back on Track Achieving Healthy Weight Loss podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alicia Shelley. Have you ever felt stressed and found yourself standing in front of the refrigerator or the pantry searching for something to eat, even though you knew you weren't hungry? I know I've done that. And this is a classic example of emotional eating. Emotional eating is the act of turning to food in response to emotions, stress, or other feelings, rather than a physical hunger. This can also be known as comfort eating or stress-induced eating, and this behavior often leads to consuming foods that are high in calories but low in nutrients, and foods that offer a temporary relief but can contribute to long-term health issues. Emotional eating is a way many of us try to cope with negative emotions like sadness, anxiety, and stress. Now, while some eating disorders have emotional eating as a characteristic, such as binge eating, in this episode, we will be focusing on the general emotional eating, just in general, or the umbrella terminology. And if you experience an eating disorder, such as binge eating, anorexia, bulimia, or any of the other different eating disorders, it is important that you seek professional help for that. Because today we're just going to be focusing on general emotional eating. Now, according to a survey by the American Psychological Association, 38% of adults reported engaging in some emotional eating in the past month, with nearly half of them doing it on a weekly basis. So why do we turn to food for comfort? Well, there are 8 common triggers that trigger emotional eating. Number 1, stress, and more stress. High stress levels can lead to an increase in cortisol, a hormone that can make you crave sugary, fatty, and salty comfort foods. Also, let's not forget boredom. Eating out of boredom can occur when people use food to fill time or give them something to do. Loneliness is a trigger. Food can provide temporary comfort when somebody's feeling lonely or isolated. And number 4 is sadness or depression. Emotionally eating is often used to soothe feelings of sadness or to lift a mood temporarily, especially with foods that are high in sugar or carbs. And these are going to be the ones that you really like: your cakes, your ice cream, your cookies, all the different high in sugary carbs type foods. Next, fatigue. When you're tired, sometimes people can reach out to food, especially high calorie snacks to boost energy or to stay awake. Man, I know when I was in the hospital, I have to drink all types of sugary things and eat sugary things so I could stay awake while I was on shift. Next, anxiety or feelings of nervousness or worry can lead to emotional eating as a way to manage or suppress anxious thoughts. And sometimes even celebration and social influences can trigger emotional eating, especially during social gatherings where food is often the focus. But the emotional eating in this context is triggered by peer pressure or the expectation to indulge. I mean, how many of us had somebody look at our plate and say, "That's all you're eating? You're not eating anymore?" Like all that peer pressure, it can trigger emotional eating. Last but not least, we have emotional triggers from childhood. Many people associate food with positive childhood memories, like, oh, when you did something good, you got an A on your report card, so you all went out and got an ice cream. We were rewarded with a treat. And these patterns can continue into adulthood. Now, these triggers highlight just how emotions, rather than hunger, can drive the desire to eat. But let's look a little bit deeper at the science behind emotional eating. And it involves a complex interplay between the brain, hormones, and emotional responses. Here are 8 key mechanisms on why we indulge in emotional eating. The first mechanism is the brain's reward system. Now, when we eat, especially foods that are high in sugar, fat, or salt, the brain releases dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter or a hormone in the brain associated with pleasure and reward. The dopamine creates a temporary feel-good effect, making us feel, so good when it hits, which reinforces the idea that food can alleviate negative emotion. Over time, the brain begins to associate eating with emotional relief, encouraging the behavior even when we're not physically hungry. Another mechanism is the interplay between stress and cortisol. Now, we've spoke about cortisol in our prior episodes, so definitely look that up if you want more in-depth information. But here we're just going to do a little quick note, is that when we experience stress, the body releases the hormone cortisol. Cortisol is part of the body's fight or flight response and can increase appetite, particularly for energy-dense, sugary, or fatty foods. These comfort foods provide a quick energy that the body may crave in stressful situations. Chronic stress can lead to consistently elevated cortisol levels, resulting in a stronger drive to eat in response to emotional triggers. And the number 3 mechanism is emotional eating and serotonin. Certain foods, especially carbohydrates, can temporarily boost levels of serotonin, another neurotransmitter or hormone from the brain that regulates the mood. Eating foods rich in carbs can create a calming or mood stabilizing effect, which is why so many people reach for something starchy or sugary when feeling down or stressed. However, this is a short-term solution that can lead to a cycle of overeating. I kind of think about, Thanksgiving Day when we're eating all these carbs and you just feel like, I need to take a nap. That's the serotonin working. So serotonin can trigger emotional eating. Also, we need to look at the role of leptin and ghrelin, which we also talked in prior episodes. Now, for those who this is your first time listening, leptin is a hormone that signals to the brain when you're full and helping regulate appetite, whereas ghrelin, on the other hand, signals hunger. During emotional eating, the balance between leptin and ghrelin can be disrupted. Chronic stress or overeating may desensitize the brain to leptin signal, causing people to eat more than they need, even when they're not hungry. Emotional triggers can also override ghrelin's natural hunger regulation, pushing the individual to eat regardless of physical hunger. The number 5 mechanism is habit formation in the brain. The amygdala, which is a region in the brain responsible for processing emotions, works in conjunction with the brain's reward center, called the nucleus accumbens. This reinforces emotional eating behaviors. Every time food is used to cope with negative emotions, the neural pathways between emotion and eating is strengthening, which makes it a habitual response. And for some, emotional eating can be a way to self-medicate, and food can act as a distraction, helping suppress difficult emotions or unresolved stressors. And by turning to food instead of addressing the root cause of the emotion, this coping mechanism offers temporary relief but does not solve the underlying issue, which perpetuates the behavior. Next, let's look at insulin and blood sugar fluctuation. Highly processed sugary foods spike blood sugar levels quickly, but they also cause rapid drops in blood sugar soon after, which can leave individuals feeling more irritable, tired, or anxious. These blood sugar fluctuations can exacerbate emotional eating as people crave more high sugary foods to alleviate the discomfort caused by low blood sugar. And last but not least, the impact of sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation has been shown to reduce leptin, the satiety hormone, and increase ghrelin, the hunger hormone, leading to increased appetite, particularly for high-calorie foods. So poor sleep also affects the brain's ability to regulate emotional responses, making individuals more prone to emotional eating when tired. Now, emotionally eating is driven by biological mechanisms that involve the stress hormones, brain reward pathways, disruptions in appetite regulating hormones, and these processes work together to create a cycle where food provides temporary emotional relief but can lead to a long-term health and emotional challenges. And emotional eating can turn into a habit through a cycle that reinforces itself over time. And here's how this happens. First, it begins with a negative emotion or an emotional trigger, such as stress, sadness, or anxiety. That emotional discomfort creates an urge or to soothe or distract from that feeling. And instead of dealing with that emotion directly, the individual may seek comfort in food, particularly high-calorie, sugary, or fatty foods that trigger the brain's reward system by releasing dopamine, making them feel better momentarily. And then eating may provide a short distraction or relief from the emotional discomfort, which reinforces that idea again that food can solve the emotional problem. After the person has eaten what they've eaten, there's feelings of guilt, shame, or even physical discomfort from overeating may set in, which again creates this negative loop of negative emotions. And these negative emotions may trigger the cycle again, leading the person to eat more to cope with those feelings. Over time, the brain starts to associate certain emotions, stress, sadness, boredom with food. And every time the emotional trigger occurs, the automatic response is to eat. This repeated behavior becomes a conditioned response, turning emotional eating into a habit. And as the habit forms, emotional eating can become automatic, happening without a conscious thought. And the individual may reach for food out of routine, often mistaking emotional hunger for physical hunger. And over time, the person will rely on food as their go-to coping mechanism for handling emotions. And the brain reinforces the pattern each time it's repeated, making it harder to break the cycle. So let's talk about how we can manage our emotional eating tendencies. The first step is to manage these emotions is to recognize them. Recognize the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger. So emotional hunger is a sudden craving a specific comfort food, which often leads to overeating. I know sometimes all of a sudden it'll hit me like, I want this particular ice cream from this particular store right now. That is emotional hunger. But a physical hunger is different. It's more of a gradual hunger where you're like all of a sudden, oh, I am hungry. And it could be satisfied with anything. I didn't have to be ice cream. It could be satisfied with whatever is there. And then I feel full and I'm able to move on. That's the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger. Next, it's important to check in with yourself before eating. Ask yourself, am I truly hungry or am I just eating because I'm stressed out, I am lonely, I am bored? Ask yourself, why do I want to eat at this moment? Why am I in front of this refrigerator again? Especially if I just ate. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll drink a glass of water before I eat just to make sure I'm eating due to a physical hunger versus an emotional hunger, especially if it's a little bit, if I'm not sure if I'm still hungry or not. The next tip would be to incorporate more stress management techniques, especially if you're going through a rough time, such as deep breathing, journaling, taking a walk to cope with the emotions instead of turning to food. And the next is to distract yourself with healthy distractions, whether you're going to exercise, whether you're listening to music, or just calling a friend. You distract yourself with something else that's more healthy for you. Also, it's important to eat in moderation to reduce the urge to binge and create a routine which encourages setting meal times so you know which hours you do eat, and when you do eat, eating a balanced meal to reduce mindless snacking. But last but not least, consider seeing a therapist or a counselor if emotional eating is chronic or linked to a deeper health issue. In conclusion, emotional eating is the act of turning to food in response to emotions, stress, or other feelings rather than physical hunger. And there are many, many, many triggers such as stress, loneliness, or boredom. But the first step is recognizing these tendencies and trying stress management techniques and healthy distractions. And if they become more chronic, seeking professional help to help you manage these tendencies. Because remember, overcoming emotional eating is a process and it's okay to seek help. Thank you again for joining us on the Back on Track Achieving Healthy Weight Loss podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with others, like it and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review, and we will see you all next time.